Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into a little overview of these two mapping initiatives. The purpose of the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map and the Charlotte Streets map is to essentially help implement the vision of the Charlotte Future 2040 comprehensive plan. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with this plan, but it's the guiding document for our city's growth and development over the next 20 years. And it was recently adopted by City Council in June of this year. Now that it's adopted, there are several initiatives underway, all aimed at putting it into action. As shown from left to right at the bottom of the screen, the policy map, which is one thing we'll be talking about tonight, is going to provide direction for where and how future development should occur in our neighborhoods. The Charlotte Streets map is going to provide direction for our multimodal vision, connecting or along Charlotte's arterial streets and helping to connect the places we live, work, and play. And then the Unified Development Ordinance is going to consolidate and update the city's land development regulations into one document and align them so that they better implement the vision of the plan. A release of a first draft of the UDO was released earlier this month. And so you can visit the link at the bottom of the screen, cltgov.me/Charlotte Future, if you would like to review that draft and provide comments. So how does the policy map and the streets map relate to one another? We know they're both aimed at implementing the vision of the comprehensive plan, but they have a specific relationship to one another in that they inform how our built environment will evolve over time. The built environment includes characteristics of both land use and transportation, as you see illustrated here on the screen. And so each of these two maps are going to inform that built environment and how things change over time. Again, the 2040 policy map will inform what types of buildings and development occur, while the Charlotte Streets map will inform how the arterials evolve in the future. So we'll look a little bit more closely at each mapping effort. Before we talk about the Charlotte Streets map, it's very helpful to remind ourselves that what is the street? It's everything between the two building fronts. So everything, all the components listed here on the screen, from your bicycle and pedestrian amenities to your travel lanes and center lanes, they all work in concert together to support the various users along the street. And so with that, the Charlotte Streets map is going to provide a vision for how all those multimodal components should play out in the future in our arterials. The Charlotte Streets map reflects council adopted policies that have been developed and refined over the years. And it shows the recommended cross-section for our arterial streets. The map is not a project list, meaning that these future cross-sections that we want to see as development occurs, we don't have specific plans or funds identified for when and how to build them, but this is really just the vision for how these streets should evolve over time. Also, it's important to note that the street map is going to work in concert with the Unified Development Ordinance, so that again, as development occurs, we're seeing the development standards happening from the building perspective as well as from the street perspective. So we want to remind you all that you can go online and comment on the draft streets map between now and November 14th. When you click on an arterial street, you'll see a pop-up box that provides some information about the recommended cross-section. And then there's also a demonstration video on the project website that provides instructions for how to leave a comment on this map. So moving on to the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map. This map is a companion to the comprehensive plan, and as I've said, provides guidance for where and how development should occur. What's really important about this mapping effort is that it provides a comprehensive and city-wide direction for how we can balance the needs and opportunities that are associated with growth. So for example, this map is going to ensure that we can accommodate our projected future growth while also protecting features that are important to us, like established neighborhoods and open space. This mapping effort also ensures that we can accommodate our projected growth and align it with existing or planned infrastructure so that we grow more smartly. And finally, this effort is going to help us ensure that we're improving access to a number of things such as goods, housing, and jobs in the future to the underserved or historically underserved areas of town. And this is important because improving access to those areas will help ensure that we're a more equitable city in the future. So the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map was developed using a new tool called place types. If you participated in the comprehensive plan development, you're probably familiar with this term. It's basically a new classification system for organizing patterns of development. And place types are more holistic than our old classification system, which is called future land use. That only provided direction for the type of development that was appropriate on a lot, maybe residential or commercial. In comparison, place types provides direction for the type of land use that's allowed, the mix and proportions of land use that should occur, the building form and design that's appropriate, as well as mobility and open space amenities that you can expect. So with one color, we can provide a lot more guidance than we previously did in the past. And at the top of the screen, you'll see that we followed 3 key steps for developing this draft map. I'm going to talk about those a little bit more later in the presentation, just for the sake of time. Oh, my animation's messed up, sorry. This slide provides a little overview of the place type palette. So during plan development, we talked to the community about 10 different places and got their opinions about whether or not these were the right places for our community. This palette or this range of place types was adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. And so now this mapping effort is really about assigning these colors to a map. You can see that the 10 place types that we have to work with are roughly organized into 3 categories: live, work, and play. The live place types include our parks and preserves. These are the larger green spaces in our community, as well as 2 predominantly residential places. Neighborhood 1 are your lower density residential place, while neighborhood 2 is higher intensity residential. And you might see some supporting services like ground floor retail and some of the apartment buildings. Next, there are 4 workplace types. They include commercial, campus, light industrial, mixed use, and manufacturing and logistics. Commercial is predominantly car-oriented retail or office, typically found along larger interstates or thoroughfares. Campus is your larger institutional places. It could be a medical campus, educational campus, or an office campus. Light industrial mixed use. This is kind of a new place for Charlotte. This area is intended to include a mix of uses with an emphasis on employment. And the goal of this place is to help repurpose some of our older urban manufacturing areas and allow them to kind of evolve into a mixture of employment uses that can include anything from research, development, flex, and light industrial. Manufacturing and logistics is your traditional production and distribution type place. And then we have 3 place types. These are our mixed use activity centers, and they range in intensity from neighborhood center to regional activity center. There are a number of inputs that were used throughout the 3-step process to develop this draft map. And again, I'll talk about these inputs as we look at this specific geography just for the sake of time. So tonight we're talking about the Northeast Inner, which is roughly bound by North Tryon, Eastway, Central Avenue, and 277. And we're going to move into a series of maps. And the series that you're about to see illustrates the 3-step process that I mentioned earlier. So the first step to mapping or developing this draft map was to translate the existing development on the ground today into our new place type tool. And so the intent of doing this was to help illustrate how the new tool is intended to be applied. This new tool is not parcel specific like the future land use tool. It's intended to be applied at half blocks or block level. And so because place types are a little bit more, well, because they're more holistic and comprehensive, they can include a little more variety of development within one color. And so it becomes less granular than if you compared this map to our future land use map. Within this view, you can see that this area currently has a lot of manufacturing along the transit line. That's the purple color. Has a lot of established neighborhood 1, which is our low density residential places. And then there's a scattering of neighborhood 2 kind of apartments and commercial development along the major thoroughfares. And some campus as well, reflecting the existing churches or schools in the area. The next step to developing the draft map was to translate adopted policies into the place type tool. And so in this area, we translated policies adopted since 2010. And so that primarily includes the Blue Line transit station area plans along the North Davidson, North Tryon area of this map. And so the blues that you see along that line represent community activity centers and regional activity centers as recommended by the Blue Line station area plans. For the remainder of the area, we leaned heavily on zoning as a major input. The idea there is that we don't want to take away existing entitlements with this future looking map. And so a lot of the colors on this second step reflect current entitlements today. So again, we can still see a lot of neighborhood 1. There's also a helpful legend on the right, kind of summarizing the percent changes between the first step and the second step. A big change you'll see is a decrease in parks and preserves. The reason for that is some of our green spaces are currently zoned R3 or R4. And so we have to retroactively identify those as later in the process as places that should not be developed despite their current entitlements. There is a decrease in commercial and campus and manufacturing, again, along kind of the North Davidson and Central Avenue corridors, either reflecting entitlements or future land use recommendations. There's a slight increase, or there is an increase in some of the innovation mixed use. And then again, an increase in the community activity centers. Moving on, the third step in this mapping process was to build upon the adopted policies map by applying changes that are recommended within the comprehensive plan. And some of the major changes recommended within the plan are summarized in the equitable growth framework. We also applied some preservation policies and then included the survey responses that we heard in phase 1 of the engagement. The first draft of our recommendations were ultimately checked against several key sources. We wanted to make sure that our recommendations can accommodate all of our future growth projections. We wanted to make sure the recommendations could be supported in terms of infrastructure and environment capacity. And then we also wanted to make sure the recommendations were feasible from a market perspective. Just keep that in mind, that these recommendations have been checked against those key factors. So before I open up the conversation, we'll just look at the preservation policies and the equitable growth framework policies that are relevant to this area. On this map, you can see there are some assets identified in the plan as important to this community, including protecting our established neighborhoods, so that yellow, the neighborhood 1, protecting manufacturing and logistics because it provides important jobs for Charlotte, and then protecting our parks and preserves. So in this step, we went at a citywide level We tried to protect neighborhood 1 that met certain conditions. For example, if there were 5 contiguous homes that were not zoned for something higher, we tried to protect those despite what some of the adopted policies might be. We tried to protect instances of manufacturing and logistics throughout the city. In this area, that didn't play out as expected, mostly because the adopted policies trump that. And then also we wanted to protect those parks and preserves that I mentioned that are zoned for R3, but despite that zoning, we still want to protect them. And so those were properties that were brought back to green on the draft map. In terms of the equitable growth framework, this is the framework that talks about providing access to housing, jobs, goods, and mitigating environmental impacts throughout the community. At quick glance, you can see that this area is pretty well served by the goods and amenities. That's the map on the lower left-hand corner. And then it's also pretty well served by employment. That's the map on the upper right-hand corner of the grid. The areas that are hatched out are considered served. And so we are not going to spend too much time on those steps. We'll look a little bit closer at the access to housing and environmental justice in this area. Again, the areas hatched are considered well served. And from a place type perspective, that means that the areas hatched can offer a variety of housing types already today. And so we wanted to focus on the area that's not hatched and is predominantly yellow. So in this area, it's kind of difficult to find much more than a single family housing choice. So what we tried to do from a place type perspective, we know neighborhood 2 and our activity centers can provide a diversification of housing. And so we looked for opportunities to recommend those place types in this gap area. However, due to a lot of the existing development, there were a few opportunities. And so you can see we were only able to recommend neighborhood 2 along Parkwood and the plaza. Next, this area is considered to have some impacts, environmental justice impacts. Those from a place type perspective are considered areas, or we were looking at neighborhoods within close proximity to industrial uses or close proximity to major transportation infrastructure. And so you can see the areas, along Central and the blue line, you have some of that single family in close proximity. And so again, we looked for opportunities to recommend a place type change in order to try to mitigate that impact. There were not as many opportunities as we had hoped. And so we'll continue to look for tools or solutions in future planning efforts. For example, we might be able to recommend some design solutions for some infrastructure projects in future efforts that would help mitigate these impacts. Real quick before we open up the conversation, in terms of growth allocation, the city is projected to grow by almost 150,000 housing units by 2040. And this area of town, based on the draft recommendations, would accommodate approximately 1% of that housing growth for the city. Similarly, we're expected to grow by almost 200,000 jobs by 2040. And this area would accommodate approximately 2% of all new jobs based on these draft recommendations. So with that, I want to move into the conversation portion of this evening. So because this is a citywide map, we are looking for guidance from the community that can really affect the entire mapping approach. So the two things that we're hoping to discern from tonight's conversation are what are additional steps that we can add to the mapping approach that would help it be better aligned with the comprehensive plan? Or where do we need to tweak the current steps so that the map is more accurate? So those are the types of input we'll be looking for. And oh, I'm sorry, before we jump in, I'm going to ask one value-based question. In this, what we've heard from some of the input received already, both internally and externally, is that a lot of the commercial throughout the city is not necessarily aligned with the comprehensive plan's vision to create more walkable and integrated communities. And so what we wanted to ask you all tonight, there's a good amount, well, not a good amount, but there's a fair amount of commercial in this area. How important is it to you all that the commercial in this area transition over time to neighborhood activity center? Is it very important? Are you neutral on it? Or is it unimportant or very unimportant to you? Looks like we have, I think, maybe 5 participants tonight. We've heard from 3, 4. Looks like in general, most people consider this a pretty important change for this area. So thank you for answering that question. Though that's an example of the type of step or addition we can add to our mapping methodology before we come out with a second draft. And so now we'll open up the map for conversation. How we're going to do this is we're going to use the annotation tool. Ideally we'd be sitting around a table looking at a map together, but we were worried about doing that with the Delta variant. So on your screen, you'll either see an annotation toolbar along the bottom, or if you look at the top, if you don't see it, there's a view options drop down next to the green bar that says you are viewing. You hover over that, you can find the annotation option, and ultimately try to find the stamp tool and select the heart. We're going to collect comments on things you like and don't like, but the heart is the easiest icon to see for us on the screen. You can also erase or use the mouse to point things out if needed. But this is the draft 2040 policy map for the northeast inner portion of town. And when you're ready, grab the stamp tool and start adding or placing it on the map for areas that you'd like to discuss together tonight. If you have trouble finding that tool and just want to come off mute and talk, you're more than welcome to do that too. You don't have to be super formal or rigid about it. So I see a heart coming north of the country club, a heart along Central, 2 hearts on Central. Feel free to keep adding hearts. Thank you, Greg. I see you added one at the Plaza in Sugar Creek. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Can I ask whomever whoever added the heart kind of north of the club, will you come off mute and share your comment or concern with us?
That was me, Hamilton Court. That's kind of in the Shamrock Gardens elementary school area. That's an area where there's some existing commercial and some street improvements, and it seems like it would have been a good opportunity for more of a neighborhood center type of development to create a walkable neighborhood surrounded by, you got neighborhood 2 close by, lots of neighborhood 1. The elementary school being a walkable elementary school, those types of things. And so it just, I just wanted to mark that as something to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say that example is it illustrates that value question we just asked pretty well. So it was commercial per existing entitlements, but we could add to the mapping methodology some criteria that would identify this area, identify that commercial as being appropriate to evolve to neighborhood activity center. And some potential criteria might be if commercial is surrounded by N1 or N2 on local streets, things like that to help us at a citywide level identify the eligible candidates. And then we could say citywide, because these places meet that criteria, they should evolve in the future. So that's actually a perfect example to point out. Thank you. Let's move down to Central Avenue, the heart that's, well, let me see if you guys can see my.
It's okay. They're both mine too. I did a bunch of hearts.
No, that's fine.
So the one that's near the one that's closest to Briar Creek, again, that's commercial. It's neighborhood 2, and you've got like one of the largest, the densest, like most concentrated population of people in like all of North Carolina right there, with multiple apartment complexes all up over each other. And it seems to me like that of all places just is begging for more investment to make that a walkable area. There are thousands of people who live in that neighborhood 2 area, not on our side, not on this highlighted side, more on the grayed out side south of it, but it's there's like a mini city population right there.
Okay, that's a great point. Thank you. Can you all see my mouse pointing to the heart further in town along Central, close to the plaza in Central?
Yeah, that one's me too. So, and that's a conversation that I want to take broader out to the whole city. The selection of the main street this is more on the policy map, and I guess this may have more to do with the main street, not so much place types. I guess I do have some place types. So I feel like you're calling this a community activity center, and it's already like the land use already feels like a community activity center, and maybe it should be kind of aspirationally a regional activity center for future land use. I know that a lot of stuff is recently constructed, but I mean, it's pretty built out and pretty robust in the mix of types of things there. There'd be a transit stop there, so for the Silver Line right in that area. So it just seems like that whole area is gonna, we're gonna want to see a lot more office uses and expanding beyond the residential or beyond the retail and restaurant services. Do you want me to make some comments about the streets here as well?
If you could put those comments in the chat, that'd be really helpful.
Right.
We're going to share any street related comments with our CDOT partners. So if you'll drop those in the chat, that'd be great. To your point about whether a community or regional activity center is appropriate here, I would offer that while it is it's one of our more vibrant mixed use places today, it hasn't seen its full community activity center potential. And so, more intensification, more office uses, or all be things that are appropriate with this current recommendation. And we also just have to balance the number of regional activity centers that are recommended throughout the city. There's only so much, there's only so many future jobs and housing units coming. And so we have to be sparingly, or we have to recommend the regional activity center a little bit more sparingly because its future build out potential is so great. So I hear you, I understand where you're coming from, but that specific recommendation is something that we would have to look at in consideration with the entire allocation. So I'll just share that.
Thanks, appreciate it.
There are some hearts up here at the plaza in Sugar Creek.
Yeah, that was me. I spammed a little too much there trying to move my heart. My name is Greg Asciuto, and I was really trying to get the heart down closer to the intersection of Eastway and Sugar Creek. With just some questions, and I think I missed the first part about what all is entailed in a manufacturing and logistics place type. And I was just curious as to why that appears to be the only one in this highlighted area. And again, it's sitting right next to one of our high schools.
Yeah, if you don't mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle this for our team. Oops. Oh gosh. Wait. Actually, I'll just do the heart. I don't want to mess this up. Okay. Wow, that's a big one. So that manufacturing, it's like an existing storage facility, and I think there's like one business operating next to it. That is reflective of the manufacturing preservation step. But we've seen some comments on the online app that maybe that's not the best use in the future, despite the comprehensive plan's direction to protect jobs. So one of the value-based questions I didn't ask this group, just because there wasn't as much manufacturing here, is we've heard from a number of internal and external stakeholders that we shouldn't preserve manufacturing just for the sake of preserving. We should really take a closer look at that step and try to determine which locations are best, and then which ones might have a higher and better use in the future. So I appreciate you commenting on that site. I agree with you. It's just a small location across from school and a lot of residential, and so it's probably got a better future use. And there are probably some criteria that we can add to our mapping approach that would direct that in a different direction.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else? I haven't been looking at the chat. Let me see.
Yeah, hey, Catherine, in the chat, there's a question. It's really more about the streets map, about Central and Thomas being classified as a main street.
Okay, yeah, I'll again, Hamilton, thank you for putting that in there. We'll share that with our CDOT team, our partners, and what they're going to do, similar to how we're going to deal with the comments. They're going to catalog all comments and then provide some general staff responses. And so you should be able to see their response reflected on their project website near the end of November, beginning of December. We do have a CDOT representative on the call tonight. And so she's seeing your comment and can confirm that it'll be documented and dealt with. Greg, I'm sorry I didn't see your comment earlier about the bad feedback. I hope people have been able to hear me okay.
Yeah, I've heard you okay. No, there was comments from Evan Cutler, and I think he left. He thought this was the East Inner meeting.
Okay.
So.
So I also have, I guess, another general comment, not about a specific place, but this policy map seems to be oriented toward the streets map, or they overlay each other, but yet it also references like a larger mobility plan, which is way broader than just streets. And so was there any consideration to maybe overlaying all of our other infrastructure over these place types so you could get a feel for that multimodal infrastructure and how it orients to our place types?
That's a good question. Our multimodal infrastructure was taken into consideration in the modeling that's done behind this mapping effort. So there are inputs like bikes, sidewalks, travel lanes, and all of that informed where future development was most or least suitable. And then that suitability index informed where we would put some of our more intense place types. So property that has good multimodal access is more suitable for higher intensity development because more people can get to it. And so that's an input that was taken into consideration in these recommendations. But I hear you, you don't see that as easily reflected on this map.
A lot of the streets seem to be impediments to walkable neighborhoods. And if you just had the multimodal infrastructure and maybe some of the streets, it would, you know, relate to each other almost better than what the streets do.
Yeah, so I guess I was commenting kind of on like what our current capacity is and how that aligns with land use recommendations. But all streets are envisioned to evolve to become more complete and multimodal in the future, if that's of any comfort to you. Our policies have changed over time, and a lot of the streets were developed or built when we didn't prioritize pedestrians and bicyclists, but that's absolutely a priority these days. And so as we retrofit our streets, those amenities or accommodations are going to be included moving forward. Are there any other concerns on the map in this area? Vicki and Peter, Ashley, I don't want to call you guys out. Alan, I just want to make sure you feel like you have a chance to speak if you want to.
Hey, thank you, Catherine. I listened to part of it, I shut off. I was actually in the car listening while I was driving, just turned it back on. I'm gonna and we were on a land use call with Hamilton and some of the other folks last week, just the Plaza Midwood land use meeting. We're gonna have the Commonwealth Morningside neighborhood quarterly meeting, probably one of the week or two before Thanksgiving. So I'll go, like, since, technically this border for what we're talking about tonight is the north of Central Avenue and we're south of Central Avenue, but in the same, the general like Plaza Midwood business district and the stuff going on with the new future Commonwealth big development. They're having the groundbreaking for that, in a few weeks, or the ceremony for it. We need to talk too about the southern ones. I need to catch up on some of this stuff, but this is, helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, so for your purposes, the geography just south of this one, there should be a recording on our project website if you weren't able to attend that meeting. I missed it. Remember if that's already happened or not. And then we really need comments back by November, I think it's 19th.
Yeah, okay.
So if that, maybe you could share it. We have an online comment application. Maybe you could share that.
We'll definitely just share that with our residents and everybody ahead of time. Make sure people have a chance to look at it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, I'll put the playlist of the previous meetings in the chat in just a second too, for anybody who wants to watch those.
Thanks, Maddie.
Great, thanks.
You may have touched on this before, but is there any plan to incorporate, for instance, the elementary school or I guess maybe Mary Oaks is on this map too, into either campus or parks and preserves? Are you still intending to keep it as neighborhood 1?
Yeah, we're intending to keep it as neighborhood 1 because those schools and churches are seen as supporting uses for a complete community. So they're allowed and permitted and encouraged to continue in all, well, in neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2. So there's not a need to call it out as a different place. It's really seen as part of the complete neighborhood 1. And there are provisions within this policy guidance that, you know, allow it to continue and flourish. And so we just don't, this tool doesn't have to call it out separately.
Are all the high schools in other neighborhoods, neighborhood 2, or just here?
The schools were absorbed into what the predominant place type was surrounding it. So in the case of Garinger, this is Garinger, right?
Yeah.
I guess that there was more N2 zoning around it than N1 zoning. And so that's why it's reflected as N2 here. But it could have been, you know, if the opposite was the case, it could have been reflected as N1. So there are high schools that are shown as both. Elementary schools shown as both. The exception to that is when there is kind of like a high school, elementary, and middle school campus. Once it gets past a certain size, I think it was about 50 acres, that's when we set the threshold to translate to campus. Because at that scale, you really kind of start to become a different type of place rather than super integrated into the community. So I'm just reading during this feedback. And then, yeah, for those who want to watch meetings in other areas, Maddie put the link to those recorded meetings out there. Well, I don't want to hold people just for the sake of it. Does everyone feel like they've had their chance to speak or their questions answered? Maybe speak now, or what I'll do is I'll move on to our last slide, which talks about next steps. Maddie or Alberto, can you guys take a screenshot of this annotated screen?
Yep, doing that right now.
Yeah. And then we'll move on. But if people have something that comes to mind, don't hesitate to speak up. You good, Maddie?
Yep, we are good.
All right, so looking ahead, excuse the hearts. We are, this conversation is one of a series, about 33. We're doing this throughout the city, and we'll be done with this series of conversations on November 9th. Sorry, that's an error. But then the following week, we're also going to hold some office hours or some drop-in hours for those who just really didn't enjoy this virtual setting and really want an in-person experience. So we are adding those details to the project website soon. We'll essentially be at the government center and some library locations the week of, I think it's November 15th through the 19th. So if you want some in-person experience, please feel free to join us there. Keep an eye on the project website and let others know that that opportunity is coming. We have our online comment application, which again, the link has been shared tonight. That will be available through, it was originally through the 14th, but because we're going to do these office hours, we hope to keep it open one more week. There are hard copies of the 2040 map and the streets map available in all libraries and YMCAs. And so you could visit those today and look at the map and complete a similar questionnaire as we went through tonight. And then as a reminder, the feedback that we receive in this phase really needs to be able, really needs to identify citywide changes to our mapping approach. And so that's the type of feedback that you can expect to see in the second draft. The second draft will be released early 2022. We'll have another phase of engagement concurrent with that second draft. And ultimately, council will be asked to review and adopt it between February and March. So we'll be done with this relatively soon, assuming things stay on schedule. And that's all that I have for tonight, unless anybody else has any final questions. All right. Well, that
That sounds
concludes.
good.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thanks.
Everyone have a great evening.